The last Medal of Honor game was in 2012. It wasn't really received that well. Between 1999 and 2012, there were 16 Medal of Honor games, most of them with pretty respectable ratings. But Warfighter was the final Medal of Honor game. EA officially took Medal of Honor out of production in 2013. So what happened? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx we asked the question, what killed the Medal of Honor series? In 2013, EA's Peter Moore said the following: "The game was solid, but focus on combat authenticity did not resonate with consumers." Which, if you're able to translate from corporate talk, means it wasn't enough wish fulfillment. Now you could interpret that as him saying that something more realistic is just too much for consumers. Which is kind of insulting, but it doesn't change the fact that people didn't really buy the game. It sold 300,000 copies in its first week, going on to sell 3 million copies over the following year, which is not enough in 2012 even. He said that critics were polarized and gave the game scores that were lower than it deserved, but that they were done with Medal of Honor and needed to bring more continuity to their shooters. Which is the same kind of weird mixed messages type thing that we've come to expect from EA, and really every AAA gaming company at this point, kind of blaming the consumers, but also saying that the reviews weren't good enough, that they stand behind their product, basically claiming that they did their jobs and nobody else did. Which I would just go ahead and say is probably not exactly the case. But as a company that makes video games and has a large number of investors, I understand why they would do that instead of saying, we made a bad game and nobody liked it. A lot of people called it a Battlefield clone that didn't do Battlefield as good as Battlefield, while also trying to market to the Call of Duty audience, which is, by the way, not the same audience. To say that the market was oversaturated for that type of game in 2012, though, is like saying nobody was seriously entertaining the idea that the world would end in 2012. But not only were there a lot of those weirdos, there was actually more military shooters than even that. And while yes, that was a slight exaggeration, most people didn't like the game, which is a shame because Medal of Honor actually was a pretty good series. Medal of Honor happened when Steven Spielberg met with DreamWorks saying he wanted a video game like Goldeneye, but also like Saving Private Ryan. His son Max played Goldeneye a lot, and Steven Spielberg thought, hey, if there was something like that, but more about the World Wars, I'd like that. And the final game actually kind of was PlayStation's Goldeneye. I mean, PlayStation only had a little bit of time left when it came out, but aside from the fact that the PlayStation couldn't quite compete with the Nintendo 64's graphics, it was a beautiful game. More importantly, it had incredibly good sound design and the gameplay was quite engaging. Now keep in mind, if you go ahead and play that game with the idea that people considered it realistic today, and I'm not even talking about the graphics, I am talking specifically about the gameplay and its fair Goldeneye-ishness, you'd say to yourself, well, we had a different idea of what realistic was. But keep in mind, this was 1999, almost 20 years ago. I'm not going to go through each one of those games, but to be frank, as it moved through many different eras, handed off to different developers and publishers, it actually did develop into kind of its own thing. For a full decade, it did between 70s and 90s in review scores, and that's pretty damn good. Show me a series that does that now, especially one that is developed by different developers. You often have steep dives in quality or big spikes as well. And while there is a noticeable variance in exactly what Medal of Honor is, they were all pretty good games. Especially Allied Assault. That was really when the game came into its own, so to speak. It really set itself apart. It was a big, interesting production that brought you to places that, well, war games really never had. So was it really that Warfighter was that bad? Oh, I'm sorry. Consumers didn't resonate with it. See, funny thing about Allied Assault being so damn good, EA wanted to acquire the developers. EA's pretty good at that. So when Inc., the company that developed Allied Assault, was acquired, a lot of the employees left because they didn't like the idea of being strong-armed into joining EA. They left, founded Infinity Ward, and created something well, that Medal of Honor itself couldn't compete with. You might have heard of it, we've mentioned it already, Call of Duty. That's right, the people who made what is considered by many to be the very best Medal of Honor game pretty much created its main competitor as well. So EA. In 2002 they began a series called Battlefield with a game called Battlefield 1942. Now, if you compare the Medal of Honor series and the Battlefield series throughout the 2000s, Battlefield grew faster, and that's a key fact to understand. Not only did it grow faster, but its review scores continually stayed in the 80s and 90s. As former Medal of Honor developers franchise Call of Duty also grew in a similar fashion, Battlefield was looked at as competition for Call of Duty, where Medal of Honor kind of wasn't. Remember how I said in 2012, in the first week, Medal of Honor Warfighter sold 300,000 copies? Well, a year prior to that, 2011, Battlefield 3 had 3 million copies pre-ordered. So day one it had sold 3 million. Medal of Honor Warfighter took a year to do that. So combined with the fact that it had bad reviews, as well as the fact that gamers didn't resonate with it, again, translation, the game was bad, EA had a franchise that was doing exactly what they wanted it to do. Battlefield was critically well received, the consumers liked it, and it sold like hotcakes, so why keep doing Medal of Honor? Which sucks because Medal of Honor actually kind of is part of the first-person shooter canon. The franchise has some really good games, and it leaves people wondering if it might ever come back. And keeping in mind the fact that they stopped making Medal of Honor because it made business sense for them, unless it becomes obvious that there's really just a massive demand for Medal of Honor specifically, which, given the fact that a lot of people like different Medal of Honor games, and they could be fairly different from one another, just doesn't make a lot of sense, especially given the fact that EA has a war game. A war game that does a lot of what Medal of Honor was supposed to do, which is give a slightly more grounded alternative to Call of Duty. And obviously that wasn't its original purpose, but in a competitive market situation, these types of things develop, and it doesn't make sense for EA to compete with themselves. And although there probably won't be another Medal of Honor game, we would like to give Medal of Honor the Medal of Honor for essentially establishing a genre that is frankly developed into something good, although, unfortunately, under the supervision of companies that continue to try to plunder it in some way, still, Battlefield probably wouldn't be a thing. And Battlefield has been pretty good to us gamers. Did you play Medal of Honor? What was your favorite out of the franchise? Leave us a comment, and if you like this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed now, it'd of course be a good time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is of course a subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon, you can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time, right here on gameranx.